DebateCon 7 will be in Houston, Texas on Saturday, January 31st, 2026, and featuring some of your favorite debaters that you can come out and meet and see debating live, including David Wood, Daniel Hakikachu, Inspiring Philosophy, Mike Jones, and more. Check out the tickets right now in the description box. You don't want to miss it. We're expecting it to sell out. Grab your tickets now. Hey everybody, tonight we're debating atheism or Christianity, which has the evidence, and we're starting right now with the Christian side, in particular. David, thank you very, very much for being with us. The floor is all yours.
All right, well, thank you to Modern Day Debate for hosting, and to Danny and MonkeyBoy for participating. The case that Apollos and myself will be presenting for theism is historical in nature, and if successful, indicates not just that theism is true, but that Christian theism is true. Before I present the argument, let me give some brief definitions, particularly of what I take God to be, so as to preemptively stave off any irrelevant arguments. For the purposes of this debate, I will take God to be an incorporeal mind with power and knowledge that far exceeds the capabilities of human beings, and who created all physical things. I should just briefly note that although I have defined God as being incorporeal, this is meant to denote God's natural state, absent any volition on his part, rather than an immutable characteristic. And I only mention this because our argument for theism will require that God can assume bodily form. So without further ado, here's the argument for God's existence. It's a little bit long, but try to keep up. Premise 1. There is testimony saying that Jesus was resurrected, by which I'm referring to the 4 Gospels. Premise 2. This testimony comes from eyewitnesses. Premise 3. There are only 3 logical possibilities with respect to eyewitness testimony. It is true, it is deliberately false, or it is honestly mistaken. The testimony for the resurrection of Jesus is not deliberately false. The testimony for the resurrection of Jesus is not honestly mistaken. Therefore, the testimony for the resurrection of Jesus is true. If the testimony for the resurrection of Jesus is true, then Jesus was resurrected. Therefore, Jesus was resurrected. If Jesus was resurrected, the Christian God very probably exists. In conclusion, therefore, the Christian God very probably exists. So premise 1 seems fairly indisputable. Surely no one doubts that the 4 Gospels do claim that Jesus rose from the dead, regardless of how they judge the truth of that claim. Premise 3 should also be fairly uncontroversial. After all, there are only 2 possibilities when it comes to the truth of any proposition. It's either true or it's false. And if it's false, then it can only be intentionally false or unintentionally false. Hence, the 3rd premise expresses a true dichotomy. Premise 7 is a tautology and is therefore true by definition, and premises 6, 8, and 10 follow deductively from the preceding premises. Hence, the controversial premises are going to be premises 2, 4, 5, and 9. My assumption is that, unlike most skeptics, Danny and MonkeyBoy are not actually going to be interested in fighting us on premises 2, 4, and 5. I suspect that they would rather fight about premise 9. I'll leave the defense of premise 9 to Apollos in his opening statement. However, for the sake of the audience, and in case Danny or MonkeyBoy do want to fight us on any of the other vulnerable premises, I will offer a brief defense of them now. Premise 2 asserts that the testimony comes from eyewitnesses. This should not be taken to necessarily mean that all of the Gospels come to us directly from eyewitnesses, since we do not believe that Mark and Luke come directly from eyewitnesses. However, as I will explain momentarily, we do believe that the information within them derives secondhand from eyewitnesses, as church tradition links Mark to Peter, and Luke explicitly tells us that his information comes from eyewitnesses. Premise 2 is controversial because most biblical scholars do not actually agree that the Gospels were actually authored by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, yet the evidence for the traditional authorship of the Gospels is compelling. We might bunch it into 3 broad categories: manuscript evidence, internal evidence, and external evidence. The manuscripts are virtually unanimous in their attribution of the Gospels to their traditional authors. No anonymous copies exist. Matthew's unique material mentions specific coins more than the others, which is more expected on the hypothesis that he was a tax collector. Luke identifies himself with Paul in Acts and the various we passages. Mark spotlights Peter more than the other Gospels, which would be expected if he were writing for Peter, as the external evidence consistently says. and John explicitly identifies the author as an eyewitness in chapter 21, verse 24. Lastly, the external sources are in near unanimous agreement about the traditional authors. The most significant of these is Papias of Hierapolis, who may have been writing in the late 1st century, the very same decade as the Gospel of John. He also appears to have been a disciple of John himself, and so he'd be ideally placed to know who wrote that Gospel. All in all, the evidence for the second premise is considerable. Premise 4 says that the testimony for the resurrection is not deliberately false. This is justified by the intense persecution that the apostles experienced for their belief in the resurrection. We have pretty good evidence that the Jews were persecuting the apostles from the very inception of the church, and thanks to Tacitus, we know that the Romans began persecuting the Christians quite harshly in the early to mid-60s. The Neronian persecution claimed the lives of at least Peter and Paul, who, according to Clement of Rome, both died as martyrs. Given that one of the strongest human desires is self-preservation, it appears highly unlikely that the disciples were deliberately lying about the resurrection. That brings us to the 5th premise, which says that the apostles' testimony is not honestly mistaken. The best option open to the skeptic of this premise is to say that the disciples were suffering from grief hallucinations, but the problems with this explanation are legion, ranging from the fact that the disciples claim to touch Jesus, even though tactile hallucinations are incredibly rare, to its inability to account for the empty tomb. That must be granted if we accept the testimony is honestly mistaken. Much more can be said in defense of each premise. I'm happy to dig into that if Danny and MonkeyBoy want to, but as I said, from what I've seen of them in the past, I'm doubtful that they will actually even want to challenge us on the first 8 premises. They're most likely just going to grant the reality of Jesus rising from the dead for the sake of argument, and then challenge the inference from here to theism. So that brings us to premise 9. But since I've exhausted my time, I'll turn it over to Apollos to defend this premise. Thank you all.
Thank you, David. And let me just share my screen real quick and let me know if you guys can see it just fine.
You got it.
Share. Can you guys see that?
Now we can, yes.
Okay, sweet. All right, thank you, David. Before us tonight is the inescapable implication of said miraculous event that if Jesus was resurrected from the dead, then the Christian God very probably exists. For this second part of the opening statement, we will grant the resurrection as a historical fact and ask not whether it happened, but what it means. A dead man walking is a mystery. A dead man raised by a specific agent with a specific purpose is a revelation. Our task, therefore, is to evaluate the competing explanations for this granted supernatural event and determine which is the most rational. To this end, we utilize the inference to the best explanation for finding the hypothesis that best satisfies the systematized theoretical virtues. First, the Christian God hypothesis posits that the resurrection is a truthful, congruent act by a supremely perfect and omnibenevolent creator. It's an act of divine veracity performed to vindicate the claims of Jesus Christ and reveal a divine plan for redemption. In this view, the miracle is a direct signal whose meaning aligns perfectly with the author's nature. Conversely, the deceptive surrogate hypothesis suggests that the resurrection was an act performed by another powerful but non-Christian entity, perhaps technologically advanced aliens or a malevolent deity. While these theories maintain causal adequacy, the agent's motives are hidden, contrived, and deceptive. How then does someone rationally decide between these starkly different explanations? Well, we aren't forced to guess wildly. We can adjudicate between these claims with a powerful tool that analyzes the inherent structural differences between telling the truth and perpetrating a lie. Henceforth, my current original research on recursive perspective taking or recursive social inferences. For those of you unfamiliar, several academic fields support the conclusion that truth-telling is a natural, quote-unquote, System 1 equilibrium or baseline state of communication. Deception, by contrast, is a cognitively expensive parasitic operation that increases the cognitive entropy of a system, what we can colloquially call the tax of a lie. While simple or habitual lies can be cheap, deliberate, sustained deception is generally more complex and fragile than than plain truth-telling. Deception requires both System 1 and System 2 thinking. One maintains an accurate world model, while 2 simulates and manages a target's beliefs, updating both as the interaction unfolds. This dual maintenance, along with response inhibition, consistency monitoring, and impression management, increases needed complexity. Applying this principle tips the scales dramatically. The Christian God's motive, love and redemption, and the signal, the resurrection, are perfectly aligned and simple. It requires no hidden variables or contrived secondary plots. The act is a direct expression of the agent's nature. The deceptive surrogate hypothesis, however, pays a heavy complexity tax. A hypothesis is ad hoc when you invent new details unevidenced by the phenomena, like extraterrestrial pranksters in 30 CE, just to make your theory fit the facts. This is precisely what the surrogate hypothesis does. To propose it, one must add numerous layers not evidently mapping to the claims of Jesus Christ, the existence of these beings, their presence on Earth, their resurrection technology, and a convoluted deceptive motive for this one-time spectacle. So if we grant the historicity of the resurrection, we are left with a clear choice, a simple, coherent explanation on one hand, and a set of complex, ad hoc, and incoherent explanations on the other. The Christian God hypothesis explains all the historical data with a single truthful agent whose motive is inherent to his nature. The alternatives require us to embrace a radical and non-parsimonious conspiracy to believe in unevidenced multi-layered plots by aliens or foreign deities. The intellectual cost of such a position is immense. The resurrection, therefore, is not an unsolvable mystery. It is a signal with a clear return address. So, if Jesus rose from the dead, the most rational conclusion is that the God of Christianity exists. I yield the rest of my time. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that opening. We're going to kick it over to the atheist side, but first, quick housekeeping stuff. First, folks, if it's your first time here, Modern Day Debate is a fully neutral debate platform. I'm your host, Dr. James Coons, and we host debates on science, religion, and politics. Want to let you know we're glad you're here. No matter what walk of life you're from, hit that subscribe button as we have many more debates coming up, including, if you haven't seen it, at the bottom right of your screen, DebateCon 7 is happening January 31st in Houston, Texas. This is Modern Day Debate's official debate conference. It's going to be huge. It's packed with talent, as you can see at the bottom right of your screen. That poster there includes DannyPhilTalk, in fact, as he'll be debating Daniel Hakikachu between Islam and atheism. You don't want to miss it. Grab your tickets at the link in the description box or pinned at the top of the chat or comments. With that, we're going to kick it over to MonkeyBoy and Danny. In particular, MonkeyBoy, the floor is all yours.
Yeah, thank you. So starting off, I guess I have very low priors in theism for one. To kind of respond to some of the stuff they said that they're designing an inference to the best explanation given Jesus resurrected. Yeah, so for one, they kind of referred to it's the best explanation for reasons like its simplicity and other stuff. And so here's a couple things I want to address. I find it that when you're constructing explanations or reasoning, explanatory theoretic, knowing the desires or the motivations of the explanation in question are kind of irrelevant. You think, what is the course of the proposition if it were true? And, update on those evidences if they come to fruition. Now, what I fail to see is two things: how it's more parsimonious, considering the types of conceptual machinery. Find it that theism uses very strange and sui generis notions of causation when talking about immaterial disembodied agency. I also take it that it's going to be more ontologically economical to talk about aliens given their material agents producing feats with technologies we have background information of. For those reasons, even considering the charge of ad hoc and also unification, I take it that if the aliens have the specific desire to deceive humanity of Christianity, that's a particular desire that generates the expectation for a wide range of things, while the Christian God has just kind of an organized selection of separate desires that constitutes Christianity. So already, given that's in the background, we can make kind of higher in the foreground, we can make higher, we can make kind of a collection of desires and make that a more unified explanation. So for those various, types of things, I take it that the aliens explanation would actually be a more better explanation. I also find it that, again, with my low priors in theism, I don't really see how explanations like that are going to do much, ignoring the type of contrastive or the comparative abductive analysis. Other things to note would include the fact that the continuity of Christianity is made by a far more wide selection of propositions. So though that would be some evidence for Christianity, the aliens hypothesis is more minimalistic in its set of commitments. So given types of axioms or penalties in probability, like inequality rule, the conjunctive inequality penalty, I take it that the conjunction of all the propositions that constitute Christianity, like the Trinity, aseity, the resurrection, second coming, maybe creation ex nihilo, divine providence, and various others, all the historical facts being true, each one of the miracles that Jesus performs and various other things, that those evidence don't do anything to overcompensate for their low prior debt. You can kind of think as an analog, if I had a type of car, right, and I wanted evidence for that type of thing, I build in certain auxiliary conditions to generate expectations. But what you don't find is if you have like a car that is rainbow, has bulletproof windows, specific truck tires, if you compare that to the hypothesis that there's just a car with truck tires, a hypothesis that's more, I guess, epistemically humble in the set of commitments that constitutes that explanation, they're going to find that if we have certain tire marks, that is evidence for that tire. Both explanations expect that's not going to do anything unique for the other commitments found of the car with all the other, auxiliary conditions. So I take it when you're analyzing both in a Bayesian front and, explanatory theoretic, a lot of the priors, a lot of the additional commitments, and the explanatory virtues that go into like the antecedent probability of these explanations updating, I find it that the atheistic explanation still very easily comes off. Maybe I should be more reserved about that, but I find it that the atheist explanation comes out on top. Yeah. With that, I'll pass up my time. Yeah.
All right. So, some three things to consider, maybe three reasons to think that Christian theism is false, or even and perhaps even necessarily false. I'm going to bring up basically a type of problem of evil. I think there's problems with their theology, specifically when we look at the Trinity, and then the hypostatic union. So those three things. This is a God that loves you, cares about you. Jesus, after all, is depicted as a character that wanted to eliminate suffering and hunger, illness, right? I think that points to Jesus for wanting to heal people and, in fact, healing people. However, Jesus here is taken to be God, right? The God, the creator of the universe with maximal power, goodness, and knowledge, right? And you would think that he would continue healing people at a maximal level. That's something I would expect, and that's something that we really don't see very often, if at all. So there's a kind of a problem of evil, I think, on Christianity, where God really cares about creation, cares about you, but seems indifferent to a lot of the conditions of humanity in their suffering. It seems like unnecessary suffering. I think that when you look at the Trinity, right? So if you read the Nicene Creed, right, there's Jesus the Father and the Holy Spirit. They're all co-substantial. They're all of the same substance. So they want to say that in their substance, they're one God, but they're distinct in their personhood. For those that don't know, it goes further than that. It actually says in the Nicene Creed that Jesus came from the Father, but not in a kind of a problematic temporal way, where like I came from my dad, but in this like timeless sort of way where that form of causation is just not seen in in creation. I think that doctrine is highly unintelligible. When I read the Nicene Creed, it just looks like the early Christians were massively confused, and I think they were up until there was a consensus in the 4th century. There was debates about among Arians and Trinitarians about the divinity of Christ, and I think that really lowers the probability of Christianity. Now, it might be that theological trajectory, the Trinitarian one, is just false, but Christianity can salvage looking at something like an Arian view / Unitarian view or a modalist view. But this kind of returns to my consideration about the problem of evil, that this is a God that cares about you, right? And he really, in caring about you, he really wants you to have the correct theological views at the pain of a potential afterlife consequence, right? That if you don't have the right theology, you could possibly be damned, and whether that be annihilated or in hell or eternal conscious torment, just a form of negative consequence happens after you die. So the fact that the early church was massively confused of the divinity of Christ, right, I think lends itself to Christian theism being false. When you look at the hypostatic union, does anybody understand what it would mean to say that an animal is fully reptilian, fully reptilian, fully mammal? Because I can't make sense of that. And that's what I feel like I'm reading when they say that Jesus is fully human and fully God. The idea, if someone is saying that Jesus is just like me, but more powerful than Superman, right? I don't know what they're talking about. Right? Just think about the Superman case, right? What if Superman came down here and said, well, look, I'm just like you humans, like we're like the same, right? Like, wait, no, you can, fly, you have x-ray vision, you have laser eyes, you have super strength. I mean, the sun is your charger. You're nothing like me. You're no human, right? I think that's a completely intuitive response to such a Superman's claim. Now, if he lost his powers, which, if those that follow this DC universe know that Superman on occasion loses his powers, right? Then yeah, I guess I could sign off on that claim, but that's not what Christians say about Jesus, that he is fully divine, right? He doesn't lose his omniscience, his omnipotence and such. So I can't really make sense of the hypostatic union. That's just a kind of some issues, theological issues that I see with Christianity. That on the theological front, I think other religions come out front on top. I think Norse polytheism is, doesn't have such theological issues. Islam, I think, has less theological issues. And so I would sooner, on theological grounds, choose a different religion if I had to choose one. But those are some considerations as to why I think that Christian theism is implausible. But we rest our opening statement.
Thank you very much for that opening. And folks, if you didn't know, DebateCon 7, which is in Houston, Texas, Saturday, January 31st. If you can't make it, maybe you're like, hey, I'm in Antarctica, I'm in Australia, it's just too long of a trip. As you can see at the bottom right of your screen, details just updated, is that you can watch it from the comfort of your very own home by joining the Final Word membership tier. Check out our channel memberships at the join button below. And with that, we're going to kick it over to all gentlemen for our open dialogue. Thank you very much.
Okay, just a quick clarification. We didn't put this in our opening statement, but David and I agreed that for the purposes of this debate, we'll broadly define Christianity as consisting of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit within the Godhead, and however you want to parse out the metaphysics of that, whether that be some specific form of the Trinity proper, so like monarchical or social. We would even be comfortable defending things like modalism or tritheism or high Christological adoptionism as, like, broadly speaking, a part of like this Christian trajectory. So do you have anything else to add?
It's on y'all's view that Christianity is compatible with the Arian heresy.
Well,
Not Orthodox Christianity.
Yeah, not Orthodox Christianity.
But Christianity is.
If we're taking Christianity in like a broader sense, sure.
Okay, yeah, all right. So, for all you know, the Trinity, the doctrine of the Trinity could be incoherent, but Christianity can be still true.
I think there probably are certain construals of the Trinity that are incoherent, and I know this is more your area of expertise than mine, so I don't claim to have your knowledge of the options that are out there. So I'm not going to go out there and say that I think they are incoherent, but some of them certainly sound like they are when they are put out there.
Fair enough. What I'm saying is that if the Nicene Creed is incoherent, right, then Christianity can still be true on yours view. Is that the idea?
A version of it. It's not going to be Orthodox Nicene Christianity.
Okay. So there could be like anti-Nicene versions of Christianity that could be true, is what you're saying.
It'd be basically some sort of heretical.
Fair enough.
Yeah, it's just basically like a scoping problem. Like at the end of the day, like Christianity or like to be saved as a Christian is more than just a bunch of like intellectual propositions you send to. There's like a genuine moral commitment you must align yourself towards. So
But I don't
there's
think you
that.
can jettison the intellectual, as you're saying, the intellectual propositions thus far, because I think that's what's in question. I mean, like, do y'all think Mormonism could be true and be a form of Christianity?
It'd be a heretical type, but
Okay,
Yeah.
but it's still a form of Christianity on your view, but a heretical type.
in the broad sense, yeah. So let's
Okay.
distinguish between sort of Christianity proper, which I would take to be like Orthodox Christianity, and for that, yes, you're going to have to go lock, stock, and barrel on the Nicene Creed, and then we can kind of have a sort of broader Christian, like lowercase Christian, which would include things like Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses and people. And so in that sort of lowercase Christian sense, yeah, that could be true even if the Trinity were incoherent.
All right. So I guess it was sort of the dilemma that I posed about, Christian theology, Orthodox Christian theology. So I think the dilemma could be presented something like this, right? If Jesus and the earliest church, right, taught Nicene and Chalcedonian teaching doctrine, then I think it's incoherent, and so Christianity would be false. Now, then the other side of the dilemma is that let's say they either taught it or they taught a different doctrine. In the first case, if they taught it but they were just confused and they just didn't have the right theology, but nonetheless Christianity is true, or they taught it, let's say something like an Arian modalistic view, and then the second I guess round of apostles, right, just got the teachings wrong. If in that case, right, then it looks like a God that really does care about you having correct theological views, right, allowed for confusion and error in the church as early as the first century, second century, right? And I think that would be improbable given God, the Christian God's aims in having you believe correctly about him.
Yeah, I think that when you were talking about God wanting people to sort of believe correctly about him, you seem to be thinking about that in terms of like all right away, and that there's no sort of like discovery of God, right? There's no process of getting to know him. I guess that's just not the view that I have, right? It seems plausible to me that God does want people to sort of have this journey. And so this is sort of, I know you didn't bring up the issue of hiddenness, but this is sort of how I think about the divine hiddenness issue, is that it does seem to me that God find some sort of value in people having this process of learning more about him, and that can come through the process of interacting with other people and so on and so forth. So I guess I'm just not of the opinion that God is like laser beam focused on everyone having all the correct beliefs about him right away. Now, there are certain beliefs, right? Certain beliefs that are necessary for salvation. For example, the deity of Christ, I think would be one that the Bible teaches is required for salvation. Those, I think, it is very important to God that people believe correctly about those sorts of things, because obviously their soul is on the line there. But when it comes to like what model of the Trinity you want to hold to and so on and so forth, I'm not sure God cares that much that people have the correct propositional beliefs about which model of the Trinity is correct. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense, but it seems like a different problem kind of pops up. So if, let's say, the earliest Christians were massively confused about the nature of God, and yeah, maybe God wants that for some further end, right, and get this discovery aspect that you're on about. These are the very people that you trust to know about what happened historically and the historical Jesus. But if God is willing to allow their theology to go so wrong, I don't see why we should trust them as eyewitnesses for what happened historically.
Could you explain that? Because it seems like the two sorts of knowledge are going to be arrived at in very different ways, right? One is going to be based on one's own experience, and the other one's going to be sort of theoretical, making inferences from various, theological beliefs that one has, or from their interpretations of scripture. Or, in other words, one seems like it's going to be a lot more speculative as opposed to being based on direct experience.
Yeah, I'll try to explain it. So we have the eyewitnesses, right? They learned from Jesus, right? They encountered, his teachings. They listened to him, and would you say that it's likely that they have the correct theology?
in certain respects, insofar as they're like relating, say, something that Jesus directly taught, sure. They could have theological beliefs that like Jesus just never directly speaks to. I mean, by the correct theology, are you talking like broadly or every single like belief that they hold?
About whether Jesus was divine or partially divine or second in command or fully, right? For example, do you think it was likely that they have correct views about the divinity of Christ?
Yes, but also, I mean, I don't have to base that on their belief about that, right? As long as they're relating to me accurately that Jesus taught that he himself was divine, and then I have good evidence for the resurrection based on inference to the best explanation. I mean, their belief on the matter just is not doing any work in that equation.
Well, I think what I'm saying is that like if they have if you think that that's probable that they knew Jesus' teachings, right? Because Jesus didn't write anything, right? We have to rely on the earliest apostles, earliest disciples of Christ to like get at what happened and that kind of blackened segment of history. We have to rely on them, but for me, I think that assumes that God does care what they think about what Jesus taught, his divinity and such. And so that I could be wrong if I might be misunderstanding you, but that seems to undermine your previous claim about, well, maybe there's this discovery aspect of Christianity where God is not prioritizing that the earliest Christians have the correct views about the divinity of Christ.
Yeah, I'm not seeing why it requires that like I have to make any assumptions about what God is wanting just to do a historical investigation of like the reliability of a set of texts.
Well, if God is indifferent to whether they have the facts about his teachings correct, then it's going to be, then it's hard for me. Like, then why would I? If the hypothesis is that God is guiding this revelation, right? That's the hypothesis, right? God best explains why. What? Sorry, what? No.
Divine inspiration is not like doing any work in the case. Like for example, I don't think that God, cared at all about Flavius Josephus or Tacitus having the right beliefs, right? I still think I can assess the writings of Josephus and Tacitus as works of history to get at the truth, and that's pretty much what we've been doing with the Gospels in our opening statement. Is we're not making any appeal to sort of divine inspiration or anything like that.
Right, but what I'm saying is that the Gospels are more than just a historical document. It's the plan of salvation, right? Right. It's hey, this is who Jesus is. This is, in fact, this is, they want to argue, right? Church tradition. I think you did appeal to church tradition, right? I think you said in your opening statement that that these were the eyewitnesses. I don't know. There was a point where you appealed to church tradition for something, right? But it looks to all I'm saying is that if God is not guiding the church early to have correct theological beliefs, I think that makes them, then it seems like we have a kind of hypothesis where he's indifferent. You could just insert the discovery. Maybe he has a further end in this discovery aspect. Maybe they have very false beliefs and wrote all sorts of things crazy in the Gospels. And then that what I'm saying is that all of that might diminish the historical claims that are being made about Jesus. Is what I'm trying to say.
Let's take God off the table, or say that God actually just was indifferent to it. Right? God had nothing to do with, or at least nothing directly to do with the composition of the four Gospels. Like he was no more involved in that than he was in the writings of Tacitus or Josephus, right? Mm-hmm. Can you explain to me why? Like, where is the issue? Like, what's the problem that crops up if I accept that God actually was indifferent to this?
Well, let's say, I guess it kind of, if we think of it as to why I'm not a Christian, right? So I look at these creeds, I look at the scriptures that inform these creeds, right? And it looks massively confused. Right. And so, okay, they're very confused, right? They don't know how to make sense of Jesus, right? These are very confused people. It just diminishes their entire testimony if they're massively confused about the teachings of Christ. And I think that compromises what they felt, what they saw, how we interpret them seeing Christ, right? Maybe they're talking about a kind of resurrection that has nothing, that's non-bodily, right? So it just to me diminishes even the historical aspect of it. If I'm already kind of, okay, fine, I'm considering Christianity now, I'm looking at the Gospels, okay, now I'm seeing a lot of confusion, right?
It doesn't seem to me that they are confused about sort of the historical aspect, aspects of it, right? In terms of that the resurrection is bodily, pretty unanimous across the Gospels, right? What is it that Jesus taught? Pretty unanimous across the Gospels. The sorts of things that I think you'd be seeing.
Did we say the last two things what's clear to you again?
Teachings of Christ. I mean, in general terms, that he's, sort of an apocalypse.
I think it's very unclear. I think it's terribly unclear.
Okay, well, we can get into an exegetical debate about that if you want to. But the point being, it seems to me that on those sorts of things, there is agreement. Where you're going to see, or at least where you would perceive disagreement, is going to be on more speculative theological matters about, say, nature of the Trinity.
So why wouldn't we interpret the gospel writers as as talking about a non-literal resurrection, for example?
Well, I mean, for one, they seem to have Jesus doing specific things to rebut the idea that he's not, right? Telling Thomas to touch him, right? Eating things to prove that he's not a ghost.
Was that in all the Gospels? I just don't know. I haven't read them in a while.
It's in Luke and John. You have kind of indications of that in Matthew. Mark is controversial, of course, because the last 12 verses of it are disputed, shall we say. So it's not as clear that you get the sort of appearances. But I mean, you still have the empty tomb in Mark, which, I mean, certainly seems to me to imply bodily resurrection, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And okay. And so, okay, now help me understand then, what is it that you're defending as Christianity? That, and Apollos, you mentioned, okay, we're defending the thesis that Jesus is, and it's got to be a form of Christianity that's compatible with anti-Trinitarian, anti-Chalcedonian understandings of Christ, right? So exactly what is it that you're defending?
I would say I think we're broadly defending that Jesus is the revelation of God. So Jesus reveals God.
Okay. Okay, but you're not necessarily defending that Jesus is God, right?
Say that again.
You're not defending that Jesus is God, right? It's a more broader.
David, didn't we want to make this into like a Christological debate, or?
So I was actually under the assumption we were debating the existence of God, not Christianity, when I originally got into this. So I was initially defending that God raised Jesus from the dead. I am happy to defend.
Yeah, because in the original email, yeah.
Yeah, I think I remember that too. I thought the debate topic was changed last minute. So you're not crazy. You guys are not crazy.
Yeah, it was changed.
I hadn't realized that. I didn't mean to change it on you. I actually just, like, honestly, for some reason, my mind, when I put the title on, I just blanked. So you are right. We can change it. Like the title, I can change it. And
I mean, I have no problem defending that Jesus is God. Of course, I full-bloodedly believe in the divinity of Jesus. I don't have a problem with talking about that. But the actual argument that my opening statement and Apollos' were constructed to defend was that God raised Jesus.
Oh, we were in the same boat. It's not your fault, right? So it's true. I thought up until today it was about theism, but then when I saw the debate topic, I thought it was changed, and maybe I missed something in an email. But yeah, so you just return to the. I'm fine to talk about Christianity. I'm also fine to stick with the original topic.
I did want to bring up stuff on your things on the incarnation, but I also want to give MonkeyBoy and Apollos a chance to.
Yeah, they could go ahead and interact.
Before this is over, I would like to discuss my thoughts on the incarnation and bounce them off of you at some point.
Yeah, for sure. So, I guess like let's see here. Like MonkeyBoy alluded to the fact that that aliens would be a better hypothesis because given our background knowledge based off of like I guess you would say naturalism, that it's better predicted under naturalism being true, or could you clarify that, MonkeyBoy?
Well, I said that we have higher priors in aliens for various reasons. We have background information that better cooperates with that, along with the desiderata, the types of explanatory virtues would be more strongly. It's true that there might be some type of ad hoc tone, but when you consider general parsimony, you consider ontological economy, unification, and various other virtues, I think that the explanation we epistemically all believe would contrastively be the aliens, that's a better fit explanation.
Yeah, so we actually get this objection a lot, that like physicalism or naturalism is almost like the tiebreaker, but if we assess coherence with our background knowledge, this advantage evaporates because, like, in reality, we have no independent evidence of Jesus' life that such aliens or time-traveling supercomputers or demons with bodily resurrection powers exist or were present in first-century Palestine. And then, like, yeah, there's if an entire hidden intervention by aliens is highly ad hoc move, or it is a highly ad hoc move, unwarranted auxiliary assumption made solely to rescue a naturalistic worldview from one pesky data point, namely the resurrection of Jesus. And so there's also problems with like positing naturalism almost like a I guess you could say like a placeholder for evidentialism, which doesn't seem to be very evident as like a metaphysical theory in my opinion.
Well, to be clear, I explicitly avoided use of supernatural, natural. I find those to be like very unclear phrases, but it seems like this thing too, quoque, if the objection is to say that if we had aliens, there's a question concerning if we have independent reasons to think that if they existed, that they would have these types of things, these interests, these abilities. But the same thing is true of theism. If there's a theistic entity, we know he's causally efficacious and he's powerful, but you know, to what degree is he powerful? We know he has maybe certain motivations or dispositions, what type. So that type of thing would not in any way be like advantageous theism. That would be true of theism too, that type of scrutiny, right?
Well, I would agree that in both scenarios, that both hypotheses are causally adequate for generating those data points. But yeah, I mean, to better illustrate the point of like why the Christian God is a better fit for the data. So I'm just going to give a quick definition for those of you in the audience who aren't aware, but the Cartesian demon is a thought experiment by Rene Descartes, hypothesizing a powerful malicious entity that deceives him about everything, including his senses, external world, and even math. MonkeyBoy, Danny, you guys don't take that to be a serious theory, don't you?
But
Well, I'm
that's an
not worried
objection
about
to
it.
externalism.
Yeah.
You know, this isn't like an externalist, internalist like conversation.
Well, could you clarify what you mean by that?
Yeah, we're not saying that there's some hypothesis that kind of underdetermines all your experiences, and there's a question of like, how do you know you're like actually experiencing the world as it is? You know, questions of maybe like philosophy of perception, whether you know there's like direct perceptions of the actual world or stuff like that. We're just doing a stalking course where we design an explanation that's basically a doppelganger that can equally accommodate the same facts, and for independent motivations, we would prefer that explanation. That's not
okay. Yeah, then we can modify our our Cartesian demon like scenario to fit that kind of sort of like description. So like perhaps like aliens fake the moon landing, for example. Both are causally adequate, the real moon landing and aliens, but one is clearly more ad hoc than the other.
Right. Well, there's going to be obviously like the priors and the moon landing happening rather than aliens that's very easily that the priors is favor of them actually doing that. Now, when we're talking about very incredible, very metaphysically unique immaterial agents, you know, stuff like that, that becomes very different than what it is in like ordinary context, like, you know, moon landing or stuff. It's not clearly on par.
Yeah, and I
But
believe
aliens
you
it
mentioned
is.
in your opening statement that your priors for theism were low, so yeah, like yeah,
Yeah, I
that
can go into various reasons for that.
yeah, for sure. I guess like part of it too, why so just to be clear, you don't think that the resurrection is underdeterminative or is it or more
I think you could design various explanations to accommodate the facts. And there's a question concerning, you know, given a set of explanations that take up a non-trivial space in the probability landscape, which explanation should we decide between, right? I'm presenting a candidate explanation and showing how, for various epistemic concerns, that explanation is better fit for the type of explanatory project.
Okay. And your candidate explanation in that case would be the alien hypothesis. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I can run it. I mean, there's a more independent kind of concern whether or not because like obviously I don't need to like present my own chip on the board for you to make the inference that theism is the best explanation, right? But I do think that this explanation alone can grapple with the same, explanatory, the same explanandums, things to be explained, the same facts we want to explain. For that reason, I don't think that if there's one explanation takes up a non-trivial space, there's various others that I would think are obviously far more likely than aliens, and I can show to you that aliens are, a better explanation. And obviously, not only should we, no longer endorse theism for these types of explanatory theoretic reasons, but we should, be more progressive and consider, what are even better explanations than aliens given. I don't think this is a seriously good explanation, assuming the datum to be the case.
Okay. So I'm just gonna bring up a real quick chart over here to show why the Christian God is a better explanation rather than deceptive agents. So like I was explaining earlier that you can't just like take just simply the resurrection. You also have to explain like the post-mortem appearances, the transformed disciples in a single framework. Like the disciples aren't preaching anything like extraterrestrial species or like spaceships or foreign technology or anything like that.
That's
it's
expected.
totally.
That'd be evidence for. Well, if
Oh
the
yeah,
aliens
yeah.
wanted
So
to deceive you, they
yeah, yeah.
wouldn't.
But then you're paying like a model description length penalty by adding more things into your theory, which is a violation of Occam's razor.
Well, I'm building more. Yeah, obviously, I have to build in a net of auxiliary commitments to be on par with theism. But I think theism, if we're taking bare theism and we're comparing that to the type of theistic archetype you're using to expect the datum, because on a bare hypothesis, you don't generate the expectations. You have to build in the motivations and lower the prior to overcompensate with available information. You increase the net of your expectation in a basically, if we're going to speak in like a type of allegorical economical way, right? You like increase the net, right, to catch fish, which is, evidences, and it costs you to increase the net. But at the cost of increasing the net, you could get more fish. Theism is doing that from the more bare, the more generic archetype of theism, which is just like a bare theistic hypothesis. And the more, heavily loaded Christian theism is designed already with these auxiliary conditions in the background. So what I'm doing is I'm just designing an explanation with roughly equal auxiliary conditions to generate the exact same expectations.
Yeah, but I don't think though that you're getting like the same net of like explanatory power by adding those auxiliaries as opposed to the Christian God directly mapping off of the disciples' experiences and what they believed in. So let me present my screen like for another slide. So this is on some of my original research when it comes to recursive perspective taking. So basically it utilizes things like the theory of mind to show that just like lying or reverse psychology is just generally more ad hoc because you're positing more orders of thinking. Like, so first order thinking, you're just mindful about what the other person might believe or want. Second order thinking, you're mindful about what they think you believe or want. And then third order thinking, so on and so forth. And so, like, when it comes to deceptive agents, it would be more ad hoc because you're not just saying, like, you're not just saying, like, you're basically trying to say that the aliens wanted you to believe in Christianity, but Christianity is false. But they wanted it for this other kind of like aim. So that's why I kind of drew the analogy to like the Cartesian demon, because like in both scenarios, the data are like both expected, but there's clearly one that has like a more ad hoc train of like recursive perspective taking.
Okay, well, I have a couple of things to say. So first about the explanatory power, at least as I understand that explanatory power is defined in terms of breadth and scope. And it seems that would be exactly the same for both. But for this stuff about, it's going to take multiple orders of thought or whatever, it seems like even if I grant you that, but what I find an issue with in that is that what you're doing is you're kind of like projecting psychology of humans into aliens, right? And we know that that there's more orders of thought or whatever from a human psychological profile. But you can imagine aliens don't have it that way, right? It's at least like logically possible, and we could just design we could design it with that. And of course, that would come at a cost. But again, I don't see how this cost is in any way threatening, considering what I think.
Yeah, for sure.
needed
And this
to-
is the anthropomorphic objection. It's the idea that we're importing human psychology, but we're really just importing normative rationality, because we see the same type of recursive perspective taking in other fields of evidence that don't deal with necessarily the human mind. So yes, it is evident in human developmental psychology. So children struggle with like recursive perspective taking tasks. And it also uses the prefrontal cortex, which is, corresponds with inhibition control and things like that. But it's also present in like other animals, even things like artificial intelligence, the way that we formalize like what it means to lie in game theoretic approaches, which is used by microeconomics and so on and so forth. So like, I'm happy to get more into that, but like, yeah, like if anything, like I would argue that our hypothesis doesn't really anthropomorphize, because in fact, it like perfect being theism is less anthropomorphic in many ways, because the axioms include things like non-deception and reveal salvifically relevant truths without coercion, things that aren't necessarily guaranteed by an anthropomorphic like mindset. So
I don't really understand that rationality point you made. If we can maybe touch on that.
yeah, for sure.
What is the point there supposed to be?
That it's not just importing human psychology. Like I'm not just like taking like the science of like human psychology and importing it to like how God like makes his decisions. Like this is like actually using like microeconomics and a lot of like game theoretic approaches. So like if you've heard of like things like Nash equilibrium, where there's like a limit to the number of recursive perspective takes you can make, to where like it no longer becomes decision informative. So like in the theistic explanation, it would be K level 1, and then deceptive agents it would be K level 2. So that's more recursive perspective taking tasks.
I just want to make sure we're understanding. I'm not trying to object at this point.
Yeah,
so
sure.
You're making a contrast between human psychology and normative rationality. Is if I were to assume of a being human normative rationality, would that be the same thing as importing human psychology, or is what assuming human psychology of a being that is not evidently human, like God, right? Is that the same thing as just assuming that the being has human normative rationality?
Could you clarify what you mean by that?
Oh no, I'm saying that you're saying that we're not importing human psychology. We're instead ascribing to God, or this hypothesis this being has. You said normative rationality, right? And you're making
that's correct.
You're making that sharp distinction, and I'm just wondering exactly what the difference is. I mean, it seems like there is a difference, but maybe you could be clear about what that dichotomy.
Yeah, for sure. So like we observe the same type of like recursive perspective taking, like I guess you could say like theoretic approaches, like more than outside of just human minds. We also observe it in like artificial intelligence. So like it takes more I guess you could say computational power for like an artificial intelligent agent to think more moves ahead for like a chess game, say for example. So
let me use an example. So let's say I get in a car accident and I was on the way to, let's say, a protest, and I can't make the protest. And it turns out that a lot of people, there was a massacre at the protest. And then I'd say, well, maybe God wanted me not to go. He was saving me from that. Maybe I was going to die if I hadn't gotten a car wreck. Is that importing human psychology to God, or is that importing rational, what do you say, the normative rationality to God?
Yeah, I would say like it's importing normative rationality.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe this is such a small point. Maybe we should I don't know what direction you want to
Yeah, well, the reason I brought it up is because, like, I expected MonkeyBoy, low-key, I kind of went into his Discord server to see what strategies he would use for this debate, but, and it turns out that happened to be the case that he argued for the alien hypothesis, but yeah, I mean, like, the reason I brought that up is because, like, if the resurrection is true, if Jesus really rose from the dead, then the Christian God is much more of like a parsimonious explanation than saying like, oh, the real God wanted you to believe in Christianity, but actually something else is real. So like, yeah.
In that same thought experiment, if the person said no, it wasn't God, it was alien, maybe there's some Martians that wanted to save my life, because they value life. Maybe God would value life too, of course, but would that be assuming human psychology of the Martians?
Well, what I mean, when I said that, like, it's not importing human psychology, is just it was just more of like to rebut the objection that I was doing so, as opposed to like saying it applies to one over the other.
Oh, I see. I think what we mean by assuming human psychology is kind of what you mean by normative rationality, insofar as that we assume that God has a certain set of goals, values, intentions. Right,
I think so.
Is that correct, MonkeyBoy? Maybe I'm.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Okay. So I think what we don't mean to say human psychology in the sense that in the way that you're using the phrase. I think we mean the other one.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah. And a lot of this research too, I'm like preparing for like a future like philosophical conference submission. So, like a lot of it is still in the works. So, yeah, there's that too. But
So,
I'm also more than happy to get more into it.
Before we get into the incarnation, so I'm a person looking at the data. I'm wondering if Jesus rose from the dead. Is it like the star data piece of evidence is that there were eyewitnesses and they gave this sort of testimony that he resurrected? Is that like that's the highlighted data? That's the magical the secret sauce of the data, right? That's what's doing all the work. Is that correct, or is it some other specific data?
I'm going to say it's the testimony coupled with the difficulty in explaining this as the result of honest mistake and the evidence that they are not lying coming from persecution.
Okay. And look, I'll be the first to admit, I really don't know what happened 2,000 years ago. I think it's kind of opaque to me. I don't really have a hypothesis as to why they were people thinking the way they thought in the first century, latter part of the first century. I really don't know. But when I'm comparing, okay, so there's it might be improbable that they were lying or they were mistaken or something like that, but not as improbable as someone rising from the dead. And so when I compare the probability of them being wrong, whether deliberately or not, and the probability of someone coming from the dead, it's just someone coming from the dead is far less probable to me. Right. And so I think we're going to need more data to raise the probability and to alter the probabilities in a way would overcome the low prior that I have for people coming back from the dead after 3 days.
Yeah, I mean, is that just based on like it doesn't happen very often? Like,
yeah. It doesn't, but people do lie, and people that we thought were like Ravi Zacharias, his case in point, was my apologetics hero. My whole family's apologetics hero, right? And that turned out to be, so there are people with stellar reputations and groups of people, companies, right, governments that that might have had a really good trajectory, and it turns out we were just wrong. And yeah, that's very improbable, right? But the coming back from the dead after 3 days is unheard of. Right, other than this case, unheard of, and so of course we hear about it, but it's like, to me, the probabilities don't compare.
Okay, I'm sure you're probably familiar with John Earman's book Hume's Abject Failure, right?
The specific book on Hume?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm not familiar with that book. Right now, now you're making me feel dumb. I'm sure you're familiar, right? I guess I should be familiar. I have to look into it.
No, sorry. It's one that gets cited a lot in these sorts of conversations, and I know you're very well read in this area, so but sorry.
Yeah. Like, don't mind the strong language over here. I've used this slide in like previous debates, but I think like David was like about to bring up like a lot of critiques that John Earman was about to make against Hume when it comes to his argument against miracles. So like one of them being the reference class problem. Basically, it's the best way I could describe it in layman's terms is like depending on what your class is for your probability calculus, it can inform what kind of output you get. So like if we were to say that, say for example, the number of, I don't know, like people who have died over the course of years, like somehow were to be informative when it comes to the probability of specifically Jesus' resurrection, given the eyewitness testimony and given all that. So like we would unintentionally be having a double standard against things like proton decay, like theoretical physicists.
That was the example I was going to bring up with the
Yeah.
proton decay. Danny, we don't like our experience of proton decay is like nil. We have no prior experience of it. But we do have like mechanisms that are set up to detect it. If like tomorrow the news, drops, right, that, a scientist has discovered proton decay, I don't feel like the fact that I have no prior experience of that automatically has to mean, oh, well, people do lie, so the scientist must be lying, right? Or that's the best explanation or something like that.
No, I agree. I think that you'd have to add in that a lot of background knowledge about protons for that to work, right? It would be really strange for me to say, oh, proton decay. Well, I've never seen a proton decay, so it's improbable. Yeah, I agree. But you see, in the case of people rising from the dead, I know a lot more about humans than I know about protons, right? I know more about their anatomical, physiological structures, right, and the way that human bodies work. And in conjunction with that information, right, then, yeah, human decay and then resurrection, right, that's gonna be far less likely. But if there was an alien out there, on the other side, long, far, far away galaxy, right, that came back alive after 10 days, right? I'm actually fine to say that. After all, there are organisms that can freeze and live a very, very long time, right? I don't know the name of these organisms, right? But I'm fine to say they're aliens. That it's actually, right, once you know more about the alien, right, it's not implausible that they kind of go from a dormant or dead state back to an alive state. But humans are just not that way based on our knowledge of their bodies, right?
So I've never understood like why those sort of considerations should be probative, right? Because the hypothesis is not that Jesus comes back to life naturalistically, right? And so it seems like the sort of factors that you're bringing
Sorry,
up.
say that again?
So no one is saying that Jesus came back to life naturalistically, right? And that seems to be, those would sort of be the only sort of, that's the only sort of hypothesis where it would be relevant to say, oh, well, I know these sorts of things about the human body, and they just, it doesn't behave that way. That seems to be the only sort of hypothesis, a naturalistic resurrection, where the sorts of considerations that you're bringing up.
Okay, I'm trying to connect this with the stuff we said previously, but go on.
So yeah, sorry, that was it. It was just
okay.
I don't.
Well,
see
I'm not suggesting that it was a naturalistic explanation that if Jesus did come from the dead, that was naturalistic. I mean,
then why does it matter that we know all this stuff about human bodies and they're not like that?
Well, we know the sort of conditions by which they live and they die, right? We know the condition, what it would take. I know what it would take, at least broadly speaking, what would, for it to come back to life, right? I don't know anything about protons, right? Except, and as far as I know, they're pretty simple things, right? I think, it's more likely that you can restore a simple machine or a simple organism back to life than a very complicated one. I take, to me, human bodies are way more complicated than like protons, but or the simpler organisms that are like frozen in ice. Those ones that can survive out in space and stuff. Those are very simple organisms. If I heard about that, if I heard about one of those, what are the things? The thing that looks like a bear. Like the microorganism that kind of looks like a bear. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
What are they called?
I forgot what they're called too.
We all know what I'm talking about. We see pictures of them. If
the whole face, the hole in their face and everything. Yeah.
I'll get the name in a second, but the point is that someone said we brought one of these back to life. I'm like, wow, nice, cool, right? But bringing back a dog, or back to life from when it was dead, or a human, right? It's just not. I know enough about those to where it's just going to be very improbable.
So is it fair to say that it's not just the frequency that you're appealing to? It's not
Right,
just that,
right. What would I exactly? Yes, and I agree. I agree with your initial objection that you can't just go off frequency there.
Okay, that's what
Yeah.
I had initially taken.
Right,
I
right.
would like to chase that with you, but I would like to get to problem of evil at least because I think we might be able to knock this one out briefly. Potentially.
Okay. Well, wow, I like the confidence. All right, okay.
Well, last time we talked about this in Messenger, we did reach a resolution pretty quickly on this one. So just to be
I
clear,
think the last time we talked about it was a logical problem, right?
yes.
Okay, but I didn't mean to present I presented more of an evidential one. We could talk about the logical one.
That's fair. We could, but I think the evidential one.
Okay.
Essentially, say like I think the way that you define evil in sort of both versions of the argument that you give, I just want to deny that it exists at all. Because particularly you're talking about like gratuitous evil, right?
Yeah, here in the discussion we had, right, that evil in the all things considered sense, I just take it to be unnecessary. Right, unnecessary event, right? Yeah. And so you want to say that all events are, however we describe them as bad or good, right? They're necessary.
Yeah, I want to say that there are no things that should not happen, that God would not want to happen, all things considered. Is there some argument to the contrary of that, or is it just like a brute seeming? It seems this way to you.
No, I mean, if you're rejecting that premise, right, there's just the only discussion to be had is like whether I think that you sincerely believe that, but I mean, I think the conclusion of that is that when we look back in history, right, there's nothing there that God sort of wanted not to occur, right? And that's not how I understand a lot of people. I think that a lot of Christians want to say that even when you look back at history, right, whether you look back at the killing fields, you look back at all these terrible genocides, blah, 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 right? And God will want to say, right, that that stuff should have been different, right? Like human history should have been different. I feel like the way that you approach it, no, God's looking at it. It's all for a greater good, right? So it needs to happen exactly as it happens, right? And then the second sort of thing to consider is then what is the sense of good and evil that we're talking about, and there might be issues with that. But if you want to talk about that, that's fine. Or we could talk about what I said in my opening statement.
I mean, we can go down there if you want. I do want to hit the incarnation, and I also don't want to take up all of MonkeyBoy and Apollos' time. My understanding is that there's not really a particularly good argument for there being gratuitous evil in the world, and it kind of hinges on a brute intuition or rhetorically. And no offense to you, but I do feel like you and Jack a little bit play this like rhetorical. Maybe I shouldn't say game, but you win rhetorical points by like getting people like me to say, "Oh no, the Holocaust wasn't really evil," and like now we can clip that part and look, we got a Christian to say the Holocaust wasn't evil, and like you can get the rhetorical points there, but like that's not a rebuttal to the position being set forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Although I feel like so there's things that you and I value. We have values to where there are certain things that have occurred that we would want to never have happened. You and I do, right?
Well, can I mention something? Because I don't want this to go unseen, because I mean, I find issue if you think God's like omnipotent, right? So you think all evils are unnecessary, or sorry, are necessary, or you think maybe they're just things God's indifferent to. What I find issue with is if he's omnipotent, then it's logically possible he achieves the same end without the evils. Like they're not logically necessary. It's kind of strange to think in what sense would they be necessary?
Yeah, I mean, they could be necessary in some other modality. Metaphysical modality is kind of a weird one, and I'm not even sure that's the one I would want to say that they're necessary in. I could I'd have to give more thought into sort of exactly what modality I would want to put it in, under which the evils would be necessary. It certainly wouldn't be logical.
Well, I think what you want to say is that it's necessary insofar as that God has a particular goal and it achieves that goal, and it's the only way, right? That I guess there is a question about the modality, right? Because it's not logical, right? It's not physical. Yeah. So I mean, to me, it has to be logical, right?
Metaphysical,
I think some type of It'd probably be some type of metaphysical, because you're right, it wouldn't be physical.
Well,
But
is God's power, on your view, is God's power understood in terms of logical possibility or metaphysical possibility?
yeah, that's a good question. As far as sort of the omni properties, this is something I actually would have to credit you with. You have convinced me that those are properties I need to give more thought to, and that's part of the reason why for this debate I just defined God in terms of a being with knowledge and power that's substantially greater than our own. Because I myself still need to work through some of the logical puzzles you present there for omni
Wait,
properties.
so in your view, it may be that the God, number one, God is the most powerful being, fine. But it may be that he's just limited in this in a non-logical way here, right? And that gets you out of the arguments for people that think that, like,
Sure,
you know,
yeah.
did you want to?
That's something that I'm open to.
Okay.
I have issues with that as well. I mean, I've listened to like people like Philip Goff put something like that forward, and I have issues with that. But in principle, it's something I could like. It'd take a lot of work to get me there, but I could see myself embracing that if like I really came to the conclusion that that was the best way to get around these problems.
But you're saying that even if you did buy this kind of really strong omnipotence, which you may not sign off to, there's no problem, right? Is what you want to say?
I think I do want to say that, yes.
Right. Okay. So it doesn't really matter. You're just saying, look, even if I assume that really strong sense of omnipotence. Okay. So if the sense of omnipotence is that that God's only limited by logical limitations, then it would only make sense to me that the modality of necessary, there has to be, it's logically necessary for God's ends. Otherwise, if it's not, then God could achieve his ends without that particular event that you're ascribing as evil in a different sense, right?
Sure, yeah. So
Okay.
I think I might then be willing to say that whatever sense of omnipotence I would want to embrace then would have to be defined by something other than restriction, other than like the logical extent there. But okay, fair enough. So it seems like you do think that there is more that can be said for problem of evil, and that's fair enough. Is there if we hit incarnation real quick? Because I want to.
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah.
So I'm like a hardcore Cartesian dualist, right? I think that minds are these simple, immaterial substances. And what I think it is to be a human being is just for your mind to be paired to a human body. And so what I think is going on in the incarnation, right? I think that God is comprised of these three minds. One of those, the Son, is paired to a human body. And that's essentially my theory of the incarnation. Some people say it's heretical, but do you think that there's a logical problem with that?
It's not very clear that there's a logical problem because I don't understand it just yet. So how many minds does Jesus have?
One.
Okay. And is that a human mind or a divine mind?
Yeah, I don't even know what the distinction they're supposed to be unless it's in terms of the limitations that are on the human mind. So Jesus's mind would not have the same limitations that yours or mine would. He would know more things. He would be able to do more things.
Okay. When Jesus said, let not my will be done, but yours, right? One way to understand that verse is that, of course, because it looks like the tension is that Jesus's will is contra God, the Father's will, right? And so one way out is to say Jesus actually has two minds, right? His will is antithetical to the Father's insofar as his human mind, but he still has the divine mind in a way where that will is congruent or actually identical to the Father's mind. You reject that solution?
Yeah, I would just say that Jesus had conflicting desires. One, that he didn't want to undergo the pain of the cross. The other, that he wanted the will of the Father to be done, and that he subordinated that first desire to the second desire.
Okay. So going back, what I really have an issue with incarnation is this power stuff, right? I'm okay. Actually, I'm fine to say that a human in principle, like I could still think about a human, I think, and think that he knows all, right? An omniscient human. Right? You could have a very weak omniscient human, right? I think. Maybe you disagree. Some people want to say omniscience entails omnipotence. I'm not so sure if I'm on that train. It seems implausible. But so it'd be like saying, like, okay, like Superman flying down to me and saying, like, yeah, you and I, we're like human. We're like the same kind of thing, right? And I'll be like, you got all this power. Like, you and I are not the same kind of thing. You're like, there's a reason why you're Kryptonian. You're not one of us, right? And so here now Jesus is coming down on Earth and doing the same thing, except way more powerful than Superman, right? Has X-ray, it's good. Go ahead.
can I tell you what I don't think that Superman's a human?
Yeah, yeah.
It's because he's not genetically related to the human race at all, right? Even though he's got the human body, right? But
Okay, okay.
now
Okay.
suppose that, me, right, or some other human being, right, is born from a normal human mother, right? So they're biologically related to the rest of us, and then that person, somehow acquires, right, all knowledge, or through whatever means they acquire superpowers or amazing powers. Well, there's one sense in which they're not different than us, but I can't like pick any point at which like you've acquired a certain amount of knowledge or gotten a certain amount of power at which you stop being human, right? Like if the
Yeah, I don't have any. To be fair to you, I don't have any answers for that either. Okay, like I don't know. Go ahead.
So the only difference here, then, with what I'm seeing with Jesus, right, is that he doesn't acquire those things at any point, right? He just always has them from the moment he's born. But the body that he's paired with comes from a human being, just like in the other example that I gave to you. And so, for the same reason, it seems to me appropriate to call him human because he's paired to a human body.
Yeah. So, there's all these fictional examples of people possessing bodies, and then like, and so we would probably say that they've lost the in this possession, it's not really a human, but especially if they get all these powers. I'll have to think of one off the top of my head. But let's go back to, you understand human as genetic in terms of genetics, right? There's a kind of, to me, a more kind of foundational understanding of human that the people of biblical times had in mind, right? They didn't know what genes were. So I'm thinking of that sense of human, right? Where, okay, a human is a being that is sort of constrained perceptually, physically by the body that they're in, right? So I can't see the behind me without turning in my head, right? Because I don't have the right physiology, right? The physiology of a horse is such that if you're a horse, right, then your field of vision is very different. The way that you experience the world is very, very different. And so I think, at least on my view, the body really constrains your cognition and your perceptual faculties, right? And so, keyword constrain, right? So if Jesus is in a body and can't see behind him, then there's questions about without turning his head. That is, then I think there's a question about his omnipotence. Now, if he can see behind him without turning his head, then he starts to look like a different kind of thing, not a human, right? And then you add on to that, what he can and cannot do in being in that body, and then he starts to look nothing like me.
So can I tell you? Can I repeat back what your argument sounds like to me?
Yeah,
it sounds to me like you're saying that a being that is like constrained in these various ways cannot also at the same time not be constrained in those ways, because obviously like straightforward logical contradiction. So Jesus can't be constrained in this sense of being human. He can't be constrained in these ways and also not be constrained in those ways on pain logical contradiction.
Right, something like that. Yeah.
Obviously, nothing to disagree with there. I guess that's not what I think of being human as being, or at least not how I've understood it in the sense of incarnation. And I don't know really of any. Maybe you could find someone. I'm not thinking of anyone off the top of my head who thinks Jesus, like when they say Jesus is human, is constrained in all the same ways that we are. Like, is that what you think Christians are saying when they say that Jesus is human? He's constrained in all the same ways we are?
Yeah. Well, that. I mean, the I don't know how would you interpret the Chalcedonian Creed, where it says Jesus is co-substantial with us, right? That presumably he has a similar kind of body, right? A similar kind of mind, that he's like, he suffers and enjoys and experiences the world the way that we do, right? I guess you're willing to sign off on that, but then you're not willing to sign off that implies any type of constraint.
I might have to think about that a little bit more. So, what's a specific example there? Something that you think might be something that would be a constraint in that.
Well, the way that you see and hear, and so I can't hear things on the other side of my house, right? If Jesus can, right, then there's something going on. He has special ears. He has super ears, right? He looks like an X-Men. I mean, there's a reason why, and this is more of an intuition pun, not so much an argument, but there's a reason why, it's very understandable in X-Men, where the X-Men want to the Magneto people, the people on Magneto's team want to say we're a different species, right? Because they have different constraints, they have different powers, right? So it, if you can hear, a mile away, right? Like I think there's some plausibility to the fact that you're a different species, right? Like,
yeah. So
Not to get too much on the lore, but I think they're called mutants.
oh, sorry,
Yeah.
mutants, yeah, okay.
I don't want to. Maybe I can grant you this. I can't speculate too much about like sort of what Jesus's phenomenology would have been like. I doubt he was hearing like every sound on the earth at like, and indeed in the whole universe, right, at every single moment. I think that generally his hearing would be like ours. I'm thinking more in terms of like that he would have sort of all propositional knowledge, that like if something is going on the other side of the house, he might not audibly be hearing it, but he knows propositionally what's going on over there. That's more the sort of thought that I have in mind here. I'm not sure if that addresses your objection, but
so if there's a sound that goes on a mile away, can God hear it or no?
Yeah, I don't really know what God's phenomenology is like. I don't imagine though that God is like audibly hearing things in general. I think that his omniscience is more like propositional knowledge. So he knows what's going on there. He could like describe what kind of sound is being made. Probably if he like wanted to, he could audibly experience it. But I don't think in general God is like.
So if I ask Jesus, the other night I was back at home and you were in the temple a mile away. I heard a sound. Was that sound an owl sound? Right. So you're saying that, well, Jesus would know that it's an owl, but he wouldn't be able to identify whether it sounds like an owl or not, right? Is that kind of what you would?
I mean, he would know the truth. He would know the proposition that like
it sounds like an
owl. But yes, he wouldn't himself like. My hunch is that he wouldn't be undergoing that phenomenal experience of hearing it and like identifying, oh, that's an owl.
Okay, and would Jesus be able to see behind him or no? I guess to be fair to you, you've already said I'm not so sure.
I don't know what his phenomenology is like. I would say he probably knows what's going on behind him, but no, I don't think he would have like. I don't think he had the sensation that like you or I would have if we literally had eyes in the back of our head.
To me, this sounds like a mutant, right? Even if like it sounds like a Superman, it sounds like a superhero, it sounds like, and yet, right, like it's like a superhero telling me, yeah, I'm just like you. You're not. I would say you're nothing like me.
I wouldn't say that Jesus is just like you, depending on sort of what exactly that means. So the extent to which he is just like you is that he is an immaterial mind that is paired to a human body, and like that's all I would mean if I said Jesus is just like you. Like that's literally all I would mean if I said that.
Oh yeah, and if we were to continue this discussion, it all comes down to what that means, right? Because you also want to say it wasn't that Jesus was piloting, right, like a drone or something, right? Like when we pilot a drone, we're not paired with the drone, or would you say that?
I'm a Cartesian dualist, so there's. It depends on how strong you want to make the analogy. It wouldn't be exactly like that. No.
Right. I think there's a heresy out there that like it's not that like Jesus was just piloting a flesh suit the way we would pilot an airplane or
right. He's experiencing the world through that.
Yeah.
If that's the point of the analogy.
Right. And so then it comes down to so what does it mean to be like to be embodied in this fleshy thing rather than in that fleshy thing? And I think we might have differences about what that means. On my view, it's hard to make sense of that without talking about the constraints on your perception and such. But
maybe we can leave it at this. For me, and I'll give you the last word on this. For me, I don't see a straightforward like logical problem with saying that the second person of the Trinity, or an immaterial mind, an eternal immaterial mind, paired to a human body, experience the world the way we do, and yet also retained like all propositional knowledge and still like had the ability to like move objects without touching them. That seems straightforwardly logically coherent to me.
Yeah, and we focused on omniscience, right? I don't think there's an issue so much with that without looking at Bible, without looking at like Matthew, I think 13:32, and Mark as well. right? I don't really see a straightforward contradiction or incoherence. I think it's intelligible to me to say that a human can know all things. I don't really see an issue with that. It's just that omnipotent stuff with the way I understand embodiment, right, is just more of, it's hard for me to understand. But yeah.
Also unrelated, but I'm kind of interested in maybe your view on free will and how you reconcile, things like foresight.
You are talking about like
if there's a tension, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see what it would be. Generally, the way that I hear it is the arguments to that effect, like William Hasker's, for example, require this thing that it's impossible for us to make a belief that God holds about the future false. So, like, if God believes that I'm going to do X tomorrow, it's impossible for me to make it false that I'll do X tomorrow. So, therefore, I have, no ability to do other than God knows that I will do. I just straightforwardly reject that. I say, yeah, you do actually have the ability to make what God believes that you'll do in the future false. It's just that we never actually do.
So do you think we have libertarian freedom?
So libertarianism, I think we have indeterministic freedom. Libertarianism requires both indeterminism plus some like moral mumbo jumbo about like conditions for moral responsibility. Basically, it commits you to incompatibilism as well as indeterminism. I'm not so sure about the incompatibilist part of that because I'm not a moral realist, so I have reservations about like the intelligibility of that sort of stuff. So basically, I accept the indeterministic side of libertarianism, and I just sort of put a question mark over the incompatibilist side of it.
So yeah, so this is a bit confusing. So when you say like, I mean, I guess I don't really want to quibble too much on what constitutes, knowledge, but you're, I mean, are you at least saying something adjacent to JTB?
Yeah, I hold to JTB. I think the Gettier problem is one of the most oversold problems in philosophy. But yeah, so yes, I hold the
Sure,
JTB.
yeah, I mean, okay, so what does it mean to say God is justified in believing John will do P if P is indeterministic?
Yeah, that's a great question. One that I'm working out. So my thought is, I want to say all of God's knowledge is non-inferential, and so the theory of non-inferential justification that I hold to would be, and sorry if we're going off on a tangent here, I hold to Richard Fumerton's acquaintance model. I won't get into all of what that is, but basically I would want to say God is directly acquainted with all facts, and so it's in virtue of that he has non-inferential knowledge of all things. What exactly does that mean for the future? Like, are there facts about the future? I haven't like worked out for myself what I think like the metaphysics of that is. Like, what are the truth makers of future tense propositions? I don't know. So the answer there is I'm still working on it, but that's kind of my tentative answer.
So you're like even indifferent whether or not there are facts of the future is what you're saying too, or?
I'm saying I don't necessarily know because this gets into theories of time, right?
Right.
And the tense like tense propositions, do they actually have truth values? How do you kind of work out the semantics there? I got actually a stack of books on my shelf over there that I need to read sometime about this. So yeah, sorry, I don't have a real clear answer for you there.
Okay, and I guess, yeah, I mean, if the view is not fully fleshed out, I guess there's not really much to combat. But I do have one, I guess, last question, at least that comes to mind. Maybe there'll be one later. When you say whatever the analysis is, which you didn't per se provide, but whatever concept you have in working, when you talk about God knows stuff, is that like univocal amongst like humans, or is there like a different sense of knowledge worked with?
I don't generally find it helpful to say that like all of our knowledge of or all of our descriptions of God are like how do they put it? Like analogies or like it's analogical or something like that. I don't find that helpful. I say that God has knowledge in exactly the same sense that we do as justified true belief.
Amen. I'm glad you don't do the analogical stuff.
Yeah, that's gonna be an amen for me too. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't buy into the whole, non-inferentialist ordeal. Um, I mean, at that point, I
You're a
just
coherentist or an infinitist, or like where do you fall?
yeah, I'm probably like a coherentist, yeah. Like I believe in holistic justification, stuff like that.
That makes sense of some of the comments that I've heard from you in some of your videos. That actually makes a lot of sense of things.
Yeah. All right,
This
well,
might be an opportunity to go into the Q&A. This is about the time we'd usually go. But are there any thoughts that you guys wanted to? I know we do have closings before. That's actually after the Q&A. Are there any last thoughts you wanted to cover though in the open dialogue before we go over to the
Well,
Q&A?
I just want to say really quickly for those that listen to this, we were all sort of, and James, I'm not blaming you, although we could. We were all. You have to keep in mind they were preparing. We were all initially preparing for theism versus atheism, and then it became a theism versus Christianity. And so I'm sorry. I want to say, if you're not happy with our performance, just keep that in mind. Because we were preparing for God knows what, I guess. So just let everyone know.
It was a tremendous debate, although I will say my apologies to all of you guys because you're right. I did screw up on that. For some reason, when I put the title in today, I had that on my mind. And then that's why. But yes, I was wrong. So it is true. But nonetheless, despite me, it was a big, beautiful debate. People loved it. We've got a lot of questions. So we're going to jump into the Q&A. And want to remind you, folks, if you'd like to hear more, our guests are always linked in the description box. That includes at the podcast, as all the modern day debates end up on the podcast as well. So whether you use Apple Podcasts, Spotify, you name it, you can find our guest links there in the description box too. Now, jumping into the Q&A, I want to say thank you very much for your first question coming in from Truth Will Out. Thanks for your super chat. If you want to attach a question to that, let me know. I didn't see one. Bless My Vibe Code says Christians are really good at one thing, I'll admit. They're really good at cucking out to the JEWISH people. Apollo and David, have you, let's see, zacked your JEWISH Sky Daddy today like good sheeple?
Brilliant argument. Very insightful comment. My mind's totally obliterated. I don't know how to respond to that.
It's the internet. You have to just, it's just the way it is. But this one, did you want to engage with that, Danny? You looked like you were really compelled.
No, I just
I'm kidding. You don't have to. Trust Crow says some apostles were executed, but there's no evidence they were ever given the option to recant. Your premise requires voluntary refusal under threat. Without that, execution only shows suppression, not willing death for belief.
Okay.
Well, yeah, I'll just quickly go ahead and, like a lot of it is kind of like hindsight bias, because the fact of the matter is the apostles were under the threat of persecution every day of their lives, so they had their whole lives to recant. They didn't know when they were going to be martyred, and many of them were martyred. But yeah, do you want to add more to that, Dave?
Yeah, this has always been a bit of a bizarre objection to me, because it at least the way that people like Apologia, who have sort of popularized it in the YouTube space, tend to formulate it, is that the opportunity for or to recant, there's like this assumption that has to be given on the site of execution, like right before you get killed. It's like, but we'll spare you if you recant, right? And of course, they know that our sources aren't detailed enough to tell us whether or not those sorts of opportunities were present. The thing is, we know darn well that like the persecution was targeted against these people because they're Christians, right? I mean, that's clear in Tacitus. So if they know that they're being targeted because they're Christians, then that is their opportunity to recant, right? You can give up on the faith, stop being a Christian, and you're not going to be persecuted. It doesn't have to be right on the site of execution. Your opportunity to recant exists in between the inception of the persecution and the time at which you're captured and executed. and for some of the apostles, there's a decent period of time there. So I've never seen the force in this particular objection.
This one from, do appreciate your question. The Lamb Apologetic says, Danny, list me 5 theologians that have works specifically for Trinity that you seem to derive your position from.
My position on what? Right. That, I mean, but I'll list 5. Let's see if I can remember.
For the Trinity.
Right. So Peter Van Wagen, I mean, he's more of a philosopher than theologian. I mean, most of the people I read on the Trinity are doing the kind of the theological, philosophical theology, I think is what it's called. So I read Peter Van Wagen, Bo Branson, a little bit of Richard Swinburne, William Lane Craig. Trying to think of the, I read a little bit of Aquinas and then some of his, some of the Latin sort of views on it. I'm going to count Dale Tuggy. He's a Trinitarian scholar.
Sijuati.
Sijuati. Oh, I try to avoid Sijuati, but
Thomas Nagel, maybe.
I don't Nagel. I thought he was an atheist, but I must. Yeah. Is it the bat guy?
I thought he was a theologian. Maybe I'm wrong.
There might be a different Nagel I'm thinking of.
This one go ahead.
Anyways,
I didn't interrupt.
Go ahead, James. The next question we can do.
Hill of Increase says Christians being wrong about God does not equal atheism being true. Atheism claims no God exists, and that claim needs evidence since it makes a positive claim.
I mean, to be fair to Danny, he didn't say that Christians disagreeing necessitates logically that Christianity is false. I think he just said it's the sort of thing that's unexpected given the truth of Christianity, and so that provides some degree of evidence against it.
Yeah, I didn't even need. Yeah, that's my response. Thanks, David. I didn't have to do anything. What a great debate. I love it when I don't have to do any work, right? And my opponent does it for me. So.
Wow. This one from, do appreciate your question. Bless my vibe code. Oh no, here we go. It's the same guy. Says, before technology told stories, especially in the ancient, it's really all we had as humans at the time. That's all religion is. Wow. So Danny, it sounds like MonkeyBoy. Danny, do you like this so far? Don't worry, it gets juicier. They say JEWISH managed to subordinate Christians into worshiping them. You still with them?
Yeah, I don't think we endorse this type of anti-Semitism. So
yeah, I'm not.
Yeah,
it's too bad there's a bit of resurgence of all of that because
This one from Theosophical Wandering says, LOL, how do aliens have explanatory power or scope over Jesus rising from the dead?
I think that's for you, MonkeyBoy.
That was never the claim. The claim was that they're equally as capable in terms of explanatory scope and depth.
Yeah, and then I would just briefly respond that it fails to account for counterfactuals, why they have this specific motive, why do it in this part of the universe, where's there faster than light travel, and yet they left no traces behind when it comes to their spaceships. I already brought up the whole idea of recursive perspective taking as a requisite for deceptive motives, which inherently makes those motives more ad hoc. The same way you would say basically that the Cartesian demon, faking moon landings, faking all sorts of things, would not be as good of a hypothesis than, say, for example, just the normal state of affairs. So, yeah.
This one from, do appreciate it, Big League Drew says, what happens after we die?
It might be over, but I hope I'm wrong.
Yeah, I don't really, have a position on that.
I say it depends.
Yeah, it depends on if you believed in Jesus or not.
You might go to atheist heaven.
Yeah, I think, but there's some atheistic Buddhists that believe in afterlife. So you can believe, if you really want your afterlife, you can have it without God.
Or you can just be an atheist like Michael Humer, who, what is it he thinks that you go back up into the sky or something until millions of years later, maybe you get paired to another.
I was unaware he had a position like that, but
he's reincarnation and all kinds of weird stuff.
Yeah, humor has the cool views,
This one from, thank you very much for your question. Big Lee Drew says, what is your purpose in life?
My
What
purpose.
is that for?
You have
I'll
a
go
purpose,
first.
right?
It's not to settle down, at least in the purview of like my immediate self-awareness of like all of my life experiences. It's stuff like this, Christian apologetics. So, yeah.
My purpose is to destroy atheists with facts and logic.
Yeah,
That's
this is
mine.
tricky. I mean, go ahead, Monkey Boy. I'll go after you.
No, I was gonna say the opposite of Dave, so I guess it's not even that original. So go ahead.
Yeah, I think the question sort of, if the questioner is like not like a theist or Christian or whatever, they seem to suggest in the question. I'm making a lot of assumptions that on atheism there is no purpose. I don't see why we couldn't have purposes. Even if purpose is just what God wants for your life, then yeah, you can't have purpose on atheism, right? But I don't see why it would be defined that way. After all, there are a lot of people that, or a lot of agnostics or atheists that talk about humans having a function, a telos, or a purpose, and they don't mean what God wants for them, right? So I don't see any incompatibility there. If the questioner is supposing there is an incompatibility.
This one from Big League Drew says, what is consciousness? Actually, Monkey Boy, forgive me. Did you want to add anything in addition? You got
No,
it.
I mean I agree with Danny. You can have like natural telos or stuff like that. So
Big League Drew says, what is consciousness? Where does it come from and where does it reside?
I mean, trying to define consciousness is kind of like one of the perennial problems of philosophy. I think to some extent it's a little bit vague because we can be talking about different things by the term. Like you could be talking about conscious experience, or you could be talking about like the thing that is conscious. Sort of like the standard definition of consciousness is, I guess it's like what it is like to be or experience something, which is like an intolerably vague definition, but I guess it's the best one we've got. As to where it comes from, as a theist, I of course believe that it comes from God, and I forget what the other part of the question was.
Where does it reside?
Oh, I mean, so I'm a substance dualist, so I kind of don't think it makes sense to talk of it residing in a location. But I think that if we're using the term loosely, then I'd say it abides in the mind or in the soul.
You got it. This one from anybody else?
I don't really take a strong position.
Yeah, I don't have a parse-out theory of metaphysics either, so I'm still working on it.
yeah, I mean same. I don't really have a view on philosophy of mind. I guess I don't really think it's all that coherent to say that the mind's immaterial, but I'm not really a physicalist by any means. I guess for maybe Hempel reasons, but I am far more sympathetic to, I guess, forms like type B physicalism.
You got it. This one from Big League Drew says, what is schnozberry and how do they taste? I can't remember. Is that from Willy Wonka?
Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
This one from, they also asked, there is a Superman in every episode of Seinfeld, and that's a true fact, and true facts are a pleonasm. Everybody agreed? Which means the use of more words than are necessary to convey meaning. Oh. This one from, do appreciate it. In Their Shoes Apologetic says, sorry I'm late, but did I hear someone say, quote, what if? This they also say, Danny's face, they say martyrdom doesn't prove any religion is true, but there's no record of someone willing to die for what they knew, saw, not heard in parentheses, that was a lie.
That could probably be disputed, but in any case, our argument was not that martyrdom proved that the resurrection really happened, or that the testimony was true. That was just being used as evidence against the idea that they were deliberately lying.
You got it.
Yeah, my comment on it is it just comes down to these sorts of debates about miracles or what have you. Okay, fine. It's very improbable. Let's say there are no cases of people dying for what they knew to be false. It seems very. You're right. I agree. It's very implausible that would happen. Right now, just compare that to the probability of someone coming back from the dead after 3 days. Right. I mean, they're both very improbable. But if I'm to choose which one is less likely, I'm going to choose the latter, not the former.
You got it. This one from Bless My Vibe Code returns. They say it's not anti-Semitic to call out facts about the history of Christianity and Judaism. The Bible was written by Jewish or Jews. That's a fact. Christians worship them. That's also a fact. Snowflake.
James, I will match every single donation that's anti-Semitic, and I'll pay you not to read them.
Yeah, I think the only thing is we like to kind of like let arguments, you put it out there, and it's like the battle of ideas. If it's bad, it'll fall by the wayside. Because if I censor it, or it's just
okay.
Like,
well, do
nope,
your
we're
thing.
not gonna
I just offered, right? That's all.
But I appreciate it. But this one from Big League Drew says, so you can have purpose, ... Okay, but what is your purpose? The question presupposes you already have a purpose.
So if it's purpose in the kind of, it's weird, like natural teleology, like independent of what I care about, then I have no idea. I don't even think there's that sense of purpose. Really, I can't, it's hard to make sense of. Now, when I say I have a purpose in my life, those are sort of my ultimate goals for my life. And right, there might be multiple, right? So I hope to live long, right? That's a goal of mine. That's a purpose that I have for myself. I'm not doing a very good job, right? But with being a soda addict, but yeah, I do have a goal to be happy and to be good to my friends and family, and sometimes my enemies, depending on who they are. If it's someone like David, perhaps better to David than other people. But yeah, I mean, there's going to be a list of goals that I have for my life. But if it's purpose in this kind of weird ass sense, then I don't even know what's really being talked about.
You got it. This one from Mr. Creenan says, question, what could possibly justify jumping to a belief in a whole new / different ontology from physical reality as an explanation for things that we do not yet have physical understanding of? Let me know if you want me to read that again. It's a mouthful.
Yeah, so my thought on this is it always struck me as being sort of very bizarre because, if anything, I feel like the leap is to the physical world, right? I mean, that's like kind of one of my philosophical beliefs that I think doesn't have like as strong of justification as I would really like, is that there is a physical world in the first place, right? The immaterial mental world, that's the thing I'm the most sure exists like at all. So I've never really understood the idea that we're like making a leap to something that's fundamentally like new or different when we make an inference to theism. The mind, the immaterial mind, is the thing that we know the best in the whole world, in my opinion. Obviously, that's controversial, but I think the arguments for theses like indirect realism and Cartesian dualism are pretty decisive. And so if one takes that perspective, the only leap we're making is to that there's a physical world, not to that there's an immaterial mental world.
You got it. Let me check if there are any others. The Lamb Apologetic says, can Danny define human for me again?
Yeah, so I don't know if I have joint necessary and sufficient conditions of what amounts to human, right? But I have a broad picture, right? A human is a type of animal that has the kinds of bodies that we have, right? This kind of physiology, this kind of anatomy, such that, usually they're embodied and constrained by that body, although I don't think that's always the case in the earliest form stages of development, in the case like zygotes, for example. But yeah, exactly. What is the essential feature that makes you human? I'm not an essentialist about these things. To me, asking what a human is similar to asking like what a chair is, or I mean, there's the biological sort of definition, the modern definition, where you could stipulate genes, right? But that's not what I think people in antiquity had in mind exactly. And after all, if we were wrong about all that, I would still think we have a sense of human. But it's a very, when you ask questions about what are the conditions that make for an ordinary object of perception, I don't really think there's a good answer to those sorts of questions.
You got it. Last one. This one from, they had asked earlier. We had one other pop in. Yerba Mate, of course. But this one from Jojo Freelancer, KUP. Earlier asked, why does the Bible say that people didn't recognize Jesus after his resurrection?
You want to take a stab at that one, Apollos?
I'm trying to wonder what he is referring to. Like maybe like the Luke 24 passage.
Probably. A road to Emmaus.
Yeah. So like it's consistent within Second Temple Jewish eschatology that the glorified body was different than the normal body. And yet it wasn't like ethereal in the sense that you could never perceive it. So like there was definitely some change that Jesus underwent to the point where he could like, walk through walls and ascend into heaven and things like that. So that would be my answer. As far as like the disciples recognizing him, I think the vast majority of disciples like recognize Jesus. Like when you take into the account things like the appearance to the 12, the appearance to the women, Paul's road to Damascus appearance, and so on and so forth. It makes the supposition that it wasn't Jesus very unlikely. So hopefully that answers the question. And then, do you want to add anything else, David?
I was going to say I'm going to do the thing I'm not supposed to do in a debate and admit some vulnerability. This is one of those stories, the story on the road to Emmaus. It's always like really bothered me. I think that the case for the resurrection is like perfectly strong from the Gospels, but that one story is always kind of like, well, why weren't they able to recognize him? My best guess is that like Jesus was doing something deliberate to like shield his identity from these particular disciples. I don't know why though. So this is kind of one of those stories where I'm a little tiny bit uncomfortable with it.
This one from Yerba Mate. Like, let me know if I'm pronouncing this right. Yerba Mate Talks. I know it's not that.
Oh, Yerba Mate Talks.
We'll say it one more time.
Yerba Mate Talks. I think that's how you pronounce it. He's the after show guy.
That's right. Says after show on Yerba Mate Talks. But they corrected me yesterday. It was something with but they say open panel. Let's discuss the debate. You can find that channel by typing, it looks like Yerba Mate or Yerba Mate Talks if you're typing it into YouTube. Big League Drew says, Minute Timmy, would like to know meow. I think that's his cat. And then I think there was maybe one last. Oh, we got that one. We got from Casey. Thanks for that, Casey. Want to say, folks, thank you so much for your questions. And if you haven't yet, check out our guest links in the description box. The speakers are the lifeblood of the show. So we do appreciate them. They make this fun. They make this what it is. So if you enjoyed this debate, which obviously you did if you've been here this long. So folks,
did we want to do like closing like comments?
Oh, you're right.
Yeah.
2-minute closing. So we can give 2 minutes to each speaker. I'm going to set the timer. So don't leave yet, folks. Starting the timer on your first word.
Yeah, for sure. I'll just use up probably just a couple seconds, but I thank everyone who was able to make it out to tonight's debate. I think that the case for Christian theism entailing theism was rather strong in light of the evidence that was presented. I really enjoyed the back and forth that Danny and MonkeyBoy had in their comments. I think they were good faith interlocutors. So I really appreciate it. Hopefully you can do some more of this in the future. So yeah, those are my only comments. So
You got it, David.
Okay. I don't have anything prepared in the way of a closing statement, but I'll just say, as far as the case for the resurrection or theism from the resurrection, I don't see that we got like a really strong objection to it. MonkeyBoy quibbled a little bit about the inference to theism. I'll let people decide for themselves if they think aliens is as plausible an explanation as theism. And Danny gave us kind of a frequentist appeal to it just not being very probable because it doesn't happen very often. I don't find either of those to be strong objections to the resurrection, but obviously audience members will have to make up their own mind on those counts. As for Danny and MonkeyBoy, really enjoyed the debate with you guys. You've both been stand-up guys. Danny, I of course enjoyed our interactions in the past. It's weird that we actually haven't had a live exchange up until this point, just because we run in a lot of the same groups. But as always, you've been a perfect gentleman here, and I've always enjoyed my interactions with you. I think you're an honest guy, and just enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you. We'll kick it over to MonkeyBoy and Danny.
Yeah, I'll be very brief. Thanks for the debate. A lot of my objections kind of focused on Christianity, although they weren't prepared for that. So just, if you thought they didn't do a good job, they prepared for some other debate about broad theism. But as far as their resurrection argument, I mean, for me, it's like, look, there's the key facts that make, on their view, that overcome the low probability that we have that someone rose from the dead, right? And those facts heavily depend on a testimony, right? And so I guess broadly speaking, I'm seeing, okay, so yeah, it might be very unlikely that these testimonies are unreliable, right? Might be, but when you compare that to the probability of someone coming back from the dead after 3 days, right? It pales in comparison. I would sooner think that their testimony wasn't reliable for XYZ reasons, whether deliberate or not deliberate, than believing that someone came back from the dead after 3 days. But yeah, MonkeyBoy, I hope I didn't take all the time.
Yeah, I do want to say, like, we were not really organized. I mean, we had zero prep. We did maybe a short call before this. So I guess you can say my credence is even greater in atheism after. No, I'm playing. But it was a good conversation. I think the pushback was really fun, pretty challenging. Did enjoy you guys as interlocutors. You were very, good faith. It was very, even though we didn't prep or anything, we were I think me and Danny were working good in sync, as was you two. No one stepping on each other's toes. It was pretty good. The flow of the conversation was pretty good. Yeah.
It was a big, beautiful debate. Folks, check out our guests in the description box. We appreciate them. They're the lifeblood of the channel. Even if you disagree with them, there's value to understanding their perspective, straight from the horse's mouth, rather than what somebody paraphrases it as, especially if it's someone from your own in-group, because people often have bias a little bit. But you can know for sure that you're getting their arguments in their strongest form if you check out their own channels. So with that, we're going to let our guests go. I'll be back in just a moment with updates about DebateCon 7, as much as well as many more debates coming up. So stick around, and I'm going to let our guests go. Thanks, guys. Amazing debate. Thank you guys so much for your support tonight. Very good debate. Is civil, reasonable. It was a quality discussion and debate. So check out our guest links in the description box. If you haven't yet, hit that like button, as we have many more debates coming up. In fact, I'm going to talk about just that right now. Basically, is if you, let me pull this over. How embarrassing. It's like amateur hour tonight. But yes, if you didn't know, DebateCon 7 in Houston, Texas, it's going to be amazing. We're very excited about this. So the tickets are linked in the description box, as you know. But if you're like James, I can't make it, it's just too far to travel, you can watch it all live from home. Now, eventually, all of the debates will be uploaded to YouTube because we always want to have our debates be public. But if you want to watch it live, this is a perk we have saved for our Final Word members of the channel. So if you are a Final Word member, you get the perks such as your name on screen, and you get to share your thoughts at the monthly Modern Day Debate Patreon/channel member meeting. But also, you get to watch the entire DebateCon conference and all of our DebateCon conferences, because we're going to keep this going, as a perk for those members. It's going to be amazing. So if you haven't yet, check out our channel memberships by clicking on the join button now. And that support means more than you know, because how these events work is no joke. We actually tend to, it's kind of the default, we lose money on the event itself. So in other words, even when selling tickets, we usually, by that I mean like 9 times out of 10, we still fail to cover all the costs of, for example, the venue, flying the speakers in, putting the speakers up in a hotel. And then YouTube is how we kind of pull ourselves out of the red and back into the black, from an accounting figure of speech. So when you become a channel member, that helps support Modern Day Debate in putting on these events, which are a blast. And we appreciate your support of DebateCon and Modern Day Debate more broadly. If you're new to DebateCon, you're like, I don't know what it is. DebateCon is our official conference run by Modern Day Debate and solely by Modern Day Debate, and it's going to be amazing. It is in Houston, Texas, January 31st. And want to say hello to you in the old live chat. Thanks for watching. Exa Music, good to see you. Longtime viewer, been here for years. Glad you're back. Early Christian Quotes, 87. Thanks for being here. Exotic Spida, thanks for coming by, and thanks for being a big, beautiful member. Minute Timmy says, agree to disagree. Agreed. Carefree says, am I still timed out? No, I don't think you ever were timed out. DebateCon 7 is going to be awesome. Thanks, Daniel J8876, for your support. Said, you should do one in Europe. Well, that's not impossible. And the reason is, this March, we are planning on doing our first international conference, probably at Queen's University in Canada. So this is a really big step for us, as we've always had intentions to expand and have conferences in different cities. However, international is a big new step for us. So we're very excited about that, as I'm very optimistic that's going to happen. And it's facts only. Thank you for coming by. It says, how is the atheist grounding anything objectively? Again, thanks for your question. I wish I got that during the debate, but you might be watching it back in earlier part of the debate. But yes, thank you for being here. Minute Timmy, and it's facts only. Now, I'm going to rest because we actually have a lot of debates in the next month, or I should say the remainder of this month, including, so I'm going to tell you some of the ones coming up this week, as it's action-packed. So this particular week, on Thursday, we have Made by Jim Bob versus Dr. Greg, Evolution on Trial. It's going to be a big, beautiful debate. Not only that, but then on Friday, we're hosting a debate, and this is me. I get to host all of these personally, which I do enjoy getting to be back, like actually at the helm, because for the longest time, a lot of life stuff, like the dissertation and a lot has made it difficult, where I'm glad to be back in full swing. Nadir versus The Word and I, Christianity versus Islam, which endorses slavery. So it's going to be a controversial debate. Amanda Norman returns to debate Taylor Fogarty, this Saturday, the 24th, on whether or not feminism is doing more good than harm. So, we're very excited about these debates. It's going to be amazing. But thanks for your support. Keep sifting out the reasonable from the unreasonable. I see you there, Skibby Fee-Fan. And I see you there, Willie O Primo says based. Agreed. Thank you guys for your support. We are striving to provide a fully neutral platform here at Modern Day Debate so that everybody has their chance to make their case on a level playing field. We believe that YouTube deserves a better class of debate channel, and we're going to give it to them. So thank you guys for your support. If you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button. We're at 246. So we just hit, 246,000 subscribers we just hit today. Thank you guys for being supporters of this channel. Join us while we are small, because I'm telling you, we are still small compared to where we are going. Modern Day Debate, when we're at 500,000 someday or even more, we're going to look back and we're going to say, wow, yeah, it was crazy. You remember back when we were just little 246,000? That's where this channel is going. The future is bright, and we're excited about it. Thank you guys for your support. Keep sifting out the reasonable from the unreasonable. We will see you at the next debate.